Welcome to MyCounselor.Online. I'm Cassie, and today I'm interviewing one of our awesome therapists, Tish about her recent article around trauma. Her article is powerful, and I can't wait to interview her. So let's go. Tish, thanks for meeting with me to talk about your article.
Oh, absolutely. I'm so excited to be here.
So this article that you wrote is all about trauma. And could you just define trauma for us?
Yes, trauma is any experience that overwhelms someone's body and mind and emotions ability to cope. And so there's no one size fits all. But if someone experiences a traumatic response, then that incident was indeed traumatic for them. So it can be a relational trauma, such as an affair, learning a spouse was unfaithful. It can be witnessing graphic or tragic kind of incidences. It can be abuse, verbal, emotional, assault, even neglect. It can be indirect. And so a police officer or a first responder who is exposed to traumatic details about abuse or about tragedy, they can, even though they're not experiencing it directly, that indirect exposure can cause significant symptoms of trauma.
So what are some symptoms of trauma to be on the lookout for?
Yes. So symptoms of trauma look like often repetitive thoughts or vivid flashbacks that are on replay, that feel very intrusive and very overwhelming. With them brings anxiety or sadness or fear. It's just flooding kind of the emotional, mental systems to be able to process and cope. Oftentimes, the individual experiences the need to withdraw, or from relationships, daily functioning can feel really overwhelming. And those are common emotional responses, anxiety, attacks, those kinds of things. But then there's also, trauma creates tremendous stress. And so when you think about all the effects that stress can have on us and on our bodies, stress can exacerbate already experienced medical conditions. It can bring about migraines and, stomach and, digestion issues. It can bring about muscle tension and body aches and flare up autoimmune disease. It can bring about so many physical symptoms that maybe are not always connected with that trauma or that stress, but are very much indeed connected. And then behavior, if you're a spouse or a loved one of someone who's experiencing trauma, oftentimes it changes them in a way that they feel kind of unrecognizable to you. Maybe they are struggling to cope and they're reaching for, looking for ways to cope that are out of character for them, like drinking more or shopping more, or, there's symptoms of depression and they're withdrawing and sleeping more, or there's overeating or undereating. It's just when our system to cope with stress is being overwhelmed and flooded, our brain is kind of looking for the nearest, quickest escape button. And so all kinds of difficulties can kind of surface from that, relationally, emotionally, behaviorally.
That's a lot of things.
Mm-hmm.
Experiencing trauma, man, that's a big deal.
Mm-hmm. Yes, such tremendous suffering.
Yes.
Hmm.
I want to talk a little bit about, you mentioned that people experiencing the same experience, one of them can come out being traumatized by it, and the other one can come out not being traumatized by it. I thought that was really fascinating. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yes. Our perception, how we experience something, and how we interpret and understand an event is, our true experience of that event. And because all of us are wired differently, we relate to ourselves in the world differently, we have different personalities, there are, we're just all so unique that plays into what an individual will experience as traumatic or not. That one person might, let's say, be present for an active shooter event in a large public area. And let's say that, 500 people are present. A large portion of those people may experience significant, long-lasting symptoms of trauma. And the other half of those people, or a large portion of those people, might experience distress, might have kind of an uptick of stress in their life for a while, but there's no lasting trauma. There's no onset of, kind of lasting traumatic symptoms. And so just because people are so individual, so unique in how we experience the world, and trauma is very much, experiencing trauma is coming through that filter of how we're understanding and how we're experiencing the world. It is experienced very differently across different individuals. And something that is very common about trauma is that it typically disrupts kind of previously held important beliefs or assumptions about the world, about what you can expect from the world, about what you can know about safety, about what you understand about people. And so because those assumptions, those beliefs are, held so individually and uniquely within our personalities and our histories and our experiences, that just different things, different incidences can disrupt that in different ways for different people.
So you talked about trauma affecting our relationships, and I can't think of a more challenging relationship that it affects than marriage. So I was hoping you could talk about that a little bit.
Yes. I wrote this article with that in mind, for the spouses that are in the struggle of experiencing their spouse kind of being stuck in trauma or suffering through a traumatic event, and how difficult that is. And I think an important place to start is just that you cannot be your spouse's cure. And those, very normal automatic beliefs of I should be able to comfort my spouse, I should be able to be what my spouse needs, I should be able to fix this for them. And of being able to zoom out and understand that with trauma, we are out of the scope of those daily interactions, that, with lower level stressors, we can comfort each other and support each other in a way and be able to move through and experience relief and kind of have this feeling of, we can solve problems and fix and move forward.
Work.
Yes. And trauma is just a completely different game.
Okay.
Because it is much more, it's much more difficult. It's much more, kind of ingrained into your spouse and in how they're emotionally experiencing themselves and even you and others. And so, two things can happen. Either one, maybe we feel inadequate of why can't I be enough to be what my spouse needs, and I need to give more and try harder. Or feeling resentful of I'm giving everything I know to give. Why won't they, feel better? Why won't they kind of be fixed?
Those
And
are
that
two really tough places.
Yes, a very tough spot that can create a lot of communication breakdown, a sense of disconnection, which feels very difficult for both spouses. And of remembering that, the trauma is kind of what we can be a team against, or a team in working through, and of not seeing kind of your spouse as the enemy or the problem, or yourself as the problem of I should know how to navigate this better. But instead of, being able to depersonalize the issues in the marriage and being able to recognize, okay, this is an outside, this is like a chronic illness, or something that is affecting both of us, and it's affecting my spouse in this way of they're experiencing trauma, but it's also affecting me. There's grief there, a loss of connection, a loss of having the version of my spouse that I'm used to. And so there's significant emotional need for both people.
So what are some steps that a spouse can go through to have that aspect of teamwork and have that aspect of connection?
I would say that communication is key. And so I hear a lot of spouses ask, first, what can I do? And being able to understand that your spouse who is experiencing a traumatic response or post-traumatic stress disorder, which is kind of the long-term effects of a traumatic event, that they're going to have contradicting feelings, contradicting thoughts. They're not always even going to be able to make sense of what they think and they feel. And so of really being able to employ a lot of just empathic listening, being able to validate saying things, not feeling like you have to have the answer or knowing, that you should know exactly what to say, but instead of just listening and hearing them and saying things like, that sounds really tough. I'm so sorry you're experiencing that. I'm here for you. That just those just empathic and caring responses is really communicating the power of presence, that it's safe with me to not know. It's safe to be confused. It's safe to be hurting, to be scared. And then being able to ask your spouse what they need. Do you need space? Do you need kind of time by yourself? Do you need, me just to listen? Do you need me just to hold you? Or do you need me to give solutions? Or do you want to brainstorm about different things that we can do? And so being able to, a lot of times, disconnect and communication happens when one spouse has a different goal for the conversation than the other spouse. One spouse wants to just be heard. The other one is wanting to fix it, or and so just being able to communicate what's needed, and being able to ask those questions. And then two, being careful to communicate what you need, as the supporting spouse,
Okay.
that the relationship is not going to be maintainable. The dynamic is not maintainable long-term for one spouse to, kind of not be allowed to have their own needs. That the supporting spouse, needs to be able to communicate what they need to be able to continue to be a support.
Yeah.
And for that spouse to be able to communicate that, hey, sometimes I feel confused, or I feel scared, or I don't know what to do, and I feel overwhelmed. And that can be so helpful for the spouse experiencing trauma, because then they're not interpreting those responses as apathetic or as distance or not caring, and so just being able to communicate kind of, this is where we are, this is what we're experiencing, is really important.
So good, just to be able to be real with each other, even though it's messy, to be in it together.
Yes, that it's safe to not know, and as children of God, it's always okay for us to be little children. It's safe, and our Father welcomes us into his presence to just say, come and sit. And it's okay to be a confused kid that has no idea what to do next. And as spouses, we can do that for each other. We can do that with each other, with God. And that's a very vulnerable place to be. But that is connection, that is going to build and cultivate a sense of connection, even in the darkest dark even in this super tough situation, that is going to cultivate a sense of, I'm in the dark, but I'm not alone. And so even though our kind of type A, want solutions,
Western mindset.
want like concrete concepts to move forward with. We want, successive benchmarks to move in this linear fashion. That, relationships don't work that way. And especially relationships that are in a season of suffering, like with a spouse who's experiencing trauma. And that really what we need is to feel connected and to know that in my trauma, I'm not alone. We don't know what to do, and my spouse doesn't know how to get me out, but they're there with me. And as the supporting spouse, this is hard and I miss my spouse and this is heavy and this is sad and I have grief of my own of how this is impacting and changing my life. But I'm not alone. My spouse can hear that and understand that, and I can communicate that. And so that sense of connection is really important. And because of the tremendous stress on the relationship, there's a big need for outside support as well in relationships, because spouses cannot be that in totality for each other.
That's super good.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's a really powerful reminder that we are always welcome to come to God as little children.
Yes, that, because of Jesus, we have this great advocate who can come before the throne of God boldly and always receive mercy and help in our time of need. And, I would just encourage the spouse who's the supporting spouse in this scenario, two things. One, that God loves your spouse more than you do, and that God sees their suffering and cares for them, and that God also sees how it's hurting you and cares for you and sees you, and that there's hope. Trauma is treatable. And
good news.
Yes, that this is a season of suffering, but it is not a new normal, as you take the steps for healing and recovery.
That's awesome.
Yes.
Thank you, Tish. Thanks for this article and thanks for meeting with me today.
Yes, it was my pleasure as always, Cassie.
Wow, what a powerful article. What a powerful reminder about how we can come to God as little children and how he sees us and he cares about all the things, all the details, and he loves our spouse so powerfully as well. You can find Tish's article in its entirety at MyCounselor.Online, and we also have a slew of other amazing articles written by our many therapists. So check it out.